Welcome to Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help. In this episode, we're going to give you some valuable tips on developing your unique writing voice. Do you feel you don't stand out as a writer? Do you worry about competing with native English writers? As a writer, how can you develop your unique voice? Hey Phil, hey Paul, how has 2022 been for you guys?
Hey Pete, hey Paul. I'm really looking forward to chatting about developing how writers can develop their voice, by the way. Got lots of thoughts on that. 2022 has been a bit of a whirlwind, lots of amazing things happening and learning as well. I mean, the one thing I want to share with you guys about 2022 is having thought about the year and trying to process it. We all think things could be going so much better for us, and we're here and we should be here. I wrote down a list of writing achievements and things that I've done with my clients, my business, and I was really surprised and happy to once all of those things were listed. I was absolutely amazed. And I recommended that other people do it. I said, if you are feeling down about it, look back at your year and just write down, 5-10 things that you've accomplished, and you'll be amazed at, all of the great things that you've done, and that you should be proud of yourself. So that's my message to everyone this year, is to take stock and write down that list of accomplishments. I hope you guys have got some good ones too.
Well, I saw that post and I was very inspired by it, and started writing a list of the things that I had done this past year. The year was interesting. I accomplished some things I set out to, which was good. For example, launching an online course. I did that. But the year also presented a lot of personal challenges that preoccupied me. But the interesting thing that came out of that, upon reflection, is that it reminded me how much I missed writing, because I devoted so much time last year to helping my writers, helping my clients and my students. I really ignored my own work. And the challenges I faced this year on the personal level really drove me back to it in a way. So for the coming year, I'm recommitting myself to my own writing, making sure that I'm not neglecting that. So it's been a very interesting and insightful year for me, rather than a year full of accomplishment, really, although there is that. I feel it's a year of reflection and insight. How about you, Pete?
Yeah, definitely. I'm still in the process of reflecting, right? So I haven't done what Phil's suggesting yet, but I think that's a really good thing to do. It's really important to focus on your gains, right? The things that you have achieved, the progress that you have made. Each time you do that, then it gives you more motivation, right? You feel grateful, and then that gives you motivation to go on to the next challenge, right? I'm still to do that, but in general, I've worked with some really great people this year, some fantastic journalists. And I was thinking that actually just yesterday, I finished with one student. She finished one of my writing courses. I wanted to share that with you guys and our listeners,
Awesome.
because that really reminded me actually, why I do what I do. It's really, I felt really grateful. In fact, I want to just share with you. We had a little chat on WhatsApp, and
yeah, we got it.
Got it. Yeah. So as I say, I mean, she's a lovely girl. She's from Poland, and she's finished the course yesterday. And I was so grateful to her because she was a really great student. I mean, she basically went through the steps in the course, right, in the 3 modules. She did all the work, right? And then it was so rewarding to see the benefits, right? To see how how she progressed from her first piece of writing to the last one, right? So the way that she, was much more engaging in her use of language by the last piece of writing, how she was really developed this more natural style, and how she could really more easily find the right words to show her expertise. So I was really, really grateful to her, because for me, that's what it's all about, right? When when we see the progress of our students, this is why we do what we do, right? That's so rewarding. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys and the listeners.
That's awesome. I see that little thing about the "I'll never write in English" attitude, and I think that's so true. It's a mindset. What these students and clients need is just somebody on their side who can, be their champion and say, you've got the motivation, you've got the skills, and just being able to be positive and like you said, if you do the work, then you really reap the rewards. So I think a lot of people who do that, already have the right sort of motivation and work ethic, but sometimes they just lack that attitude. And it's good. It's cool to see that when it happens, isn't it?
Yeah, Phil, this comes up again and again with the clients that I work with, the journalists. They really, some of them feel this lack of confidence, this anxiety, right? And like you said, that is the biggest obstacle of all, and it's the most important, because this brings us on to what we're talking about today, right? If you have a lack of confidence, if you're anxious about writing, then your personality, right, will not come through in your writing, right? So it's like I think one of the most important things to work on, right, is that mindset, and to overcome that fear, if you like. And this is what we're going to talk about today, right, guys? How can you as writers, both native English writers, but especially if you're a non-native English writer, right? How can you develop your voice, right? How can your personality come through so that you can share? You have really valuable stories to share, and we want to help you to do that, right?
I like that you pointed out the element of confidence, because it's just like writing in that sense shares a lot with speaking, or just relating to people in general. If you feel like you're not worth sharing, if you feel you have nothing to say, or if you're shy or you lack confidence on some level, you don't end up communicating your real personality, because for the basic reason is you're afraid to share it for whatever motivates that. So developing confidence is crucial, I think, to inevitably, or to ultimately getting to expressing your personality in your writing. You have to get past the fear of doing so first. So I really like that that piece of the puzzle. But guys, before we launch into a discussion about voice, perhaps we need to define it. So this is my question for you guys. How do you guys define voice? What is voice? And why is it important for writing? Who wants to start off with that?
I mean, I'll try. I think it's a difficult one. We did a whole episode about style, and I think we all have different definitions of that. I think voice is the same. There's no need to have one hard line definition of what it is. For me, I suppose it's the difference between pieces of writing which are attached to a writer. It's also maybe the value that we attribute to a piece of writing, based on going back to that difference. that's my thought on it. I mean, you can incorporate so many things like
Yeah.
that we will go on to talk about. But yeah, I'd say it's nailing down the different ways and the unique ways that writers can present their ideas.
Pete, do you have any thoughts on that? I have a couple.
Yeah,
I'd
I mean,
like to get to.
Just to add, I mean, for one key word for me to do with voice is personality, right? So it's allowing your personality to come through in your writing.
Yeah, I think of voice as you guys are pointing out. It's another way of saying personality, but in the writing form. And I think of it as a combination of elements, including style, which we've discussed before. It includes also word choice. It includes sensibilities around humor or intensity. I think it also includes elements of subject matter, right? Marrying the way you write with the subject you're talking about, even in fiction. Is it a romantic story? Is it an adventure story? Each one is going to require a different sensibility to it. So I think of voice as like a matrix of all these elements coming together in a unique way. Pacing, punctuation, use of grammar, how the grammar is manipulated. All of that adds up to expressing personality and voice. If you think about in a social sense, a personality of someone you know, what is it? Is it the way they talk? Well, it is, but it's also the way they look. It's the way they use their gestures. It's the way they behave. It's the things that they stand for and are interested in. I think the challenge with writing is getting all of that expressed in words. Does that make any sense? Or am I off in the stratosphere?
For sure. I mean, I wanted to jump in and ask if you think that, the difficulty in defining what voice is that one of the reasons that writers run scared, or they feel too scared to sort of show their personality in their writing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that confidence piece is crucial. The inhibition we feel about sharing our truth or expressing what we really, really feel. I think that's definitely a part of it. You can't possibly, your voice and personality can't possibly shine through until you get that confidence piece, I think.
Yeah, I think that sometimes gets in the way of writers developing their voice in English as a foreign language is that they're afraid about grammar, afraid about making mistakes in grammar, right? They're afraid how that looks, for example, to a native speak editors, right? And I think that is what affects their confidence. And you use the word inhibition, I think, right, Paul. That's what inhibits them, right? They're able to allow their writing voice to develop because they're like too worried about all this other stuff, right?
I think it's deeply, sorry, Paul, to jump in. I think it's deeply connected to history and culture as well, right? Because a lot of writers whose first language is not English, they've had negative perceptions and negative comments and less value put on their work simply because of the mistakes and the lessons of the past. So hopefully we're moving towards somewhere now where we're celebrating difference rather than punishing it. But I agree with you, Pete, that accuracy is important, but is it everything nowadays? If you have an editor of a publication and they can correct a few grammar snafus, well, it might be more important that the voice of that writer is really shining through and you're getting a different perspective.
Yeah, this is where I think there might be also a little bit of a misconception from some non-native writers, right? They undervalue their own potential writing in English because they compare themselves with native English writers and they think, I'm never going to be able to write as well as a native English writer. writer. But when they talk about writing as well, I believe that they're often thinking about grammar, right? Accuracy. And I really, want to stress this. If you are a non-native English writer, you actually have advantages too, right? So if you think about it, if you're from another country, you're from another culture, right? And the world needs to hear stories from everywhere, right? All different countries, all different cultures, right? And who's the best person to write about your country and culture? Is it a native English writer who has never been there, or maybe has just flown there just to write one story? It's not, right? It's you, right? You have all this knowledge, this experience. You have first-hand experience, right, of your country and culture, right? So you should really value that. You have stories to tell that, and you are the best person to tell those stories.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's where I think some of our writers lose sight of the importance of their perspective, because their perspective, their choice of subject matter or their insights about it, that's part of the voice, because they can tell a story about a certain element of their culture that the three of us could never do. And so that's part of voice, irregardless of the grammar or the diction. Put that aside, just in terms of that element of subject matter and insight, that's part of the voice, right? That's part of expressing your personality. It's a part of it. I still believe that all of these things work together symphonically, but subject matter is a part of it. It's not necessarily in the text, in the language itself. It's in the choice of what you're talking about, that view of the world. That's a valuable piece of voice. Right?
100%, yeah. I think it's good to know we're always nodding and on the same page about the trying to empower our listeners and people to believe in themselves. And we truly believe that your voice deserves to be heard. It's not just something that we say.
Yeah, that's a starting point for all of this. Yeah.
Should we get on to giving our listeners some tips about voice? Now we know what it is. How can writers develop their personality and show it?
I have a question related to that. So the thing is that when you're going to write something, right, it really helps if you have like an idea, right? You're excited about something. This would make an amazing story. I have to write about it, and I have to write about it now, right? That helps, right? But what happens if you're not inspired? What happens if you get up one day and you're a writer, so you're supposed to write every day, right? It's your job, right? Your occupation. But what if you don't feel inspired, right? What do you guys think? Because this is key, right, to developing your voice, right?
Well, in my opinion, you write anyway. In any kind of writing, I'm a big proponent of my shorthand, I say ass in chair. Doesn't matter if you feel like it or not. Get up, put your butt in the chair and do the work. I believe inspiration comes from the writing process. I think it emerges as you write, as neurons fire and ideas and connections are made. You get new ideas. And then, of course, after you're finished writing and you go for a walk, the ideas keep popping. But I think if you're a writer, whether you're a student writer or a professional, and your job is to complete something, you just have to do it, whether you're inspired or not. I think the inspiration will come. Ideas will come as you do the work. I liken it to anything that's craft oriented, including things like or habits like exercise. If you want to be healthy, or if you want to change your fitness, the trick isn't to work out and exercise when you feel like it. The thing is to make it a habit do it regardless of how you feel about it. I feel the same way about writing. If you want to write, you're just going to have to write.
Yeah. So I agree, but I'd also just add one little thing to that. The inspiration has to come, right? So you start writing, but that you have to find the way for that inspiration to come. Because if you're just sitting at your computer and you're like, man, I have to write. Come on, I don't know what to write. What do I? And then
but that's where I think the inspiration comes from. I think it just comes from as you start putting words on the page, even if they're garbage and will eventually be deleted. I think they stimulate the ideas, because when we talk about inspiration, which I believe we've talked about before, we make it sound like it's coming from an external source, some magic angel in the sky, some muse, but it's all in your brain. It's all inside you. It's a question of unlocking it and getting it down the page. So, when we're not writing and we're in the shower or something, an idea is hit, I think that is the result of having written something, even something tangential.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It's just that from experience, right? This personal experience, and also, sorry if there's a noise outside, someone's doing some work. From personal experience and from experience, working with my students. So I have felt this when I was at school, right? So I had to write an essay. Actually, I remember this. It was Shakespeare, Othello, right? I had to write an essay. It's a test, right? And I had to do it. So I was, what was the expression? Arse in chair, was that right, Paul? So
Ass in chair, yeah.
Chair. And I was like, this is a test, man. So I'm trying to answer this question for the test. And I just went blank. And I just, nothing. So one thing that you said there is really important, that it's just right. So arse in chair, but right. Yes, you have to actually write. But I've also seen this with students where, they start to write and they stop and they cross it out and then they change it and they're just they're going along at a snail's pace, and they're anxious and it's just not happening, right? And these are the kinds of problems.
I think we've talked about that in the writer's block episode about jumping to the editing stage too early, as you're writing your initial ideas. Yeah. And that's something we can teach them, right? We can teach them the process of free writing.
Yes. Yeah.
This
is related, isn't it, to voice? Because if you're editing, right, you're not developing your voice, right? You're allowing, your. I think some of this comes from your unconscious mind, right? It's this idea of just write, whatever comes to mind, just write it, and then the inspiration will come, right? But if you're editing, right, that's going to inhibit that voice development. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the getting that first draft down and writing sort of free, so that will help your voice get onto the page. I'd probably be in the middle of a couple of your opinions about ass in chair and waiting for inspiration to strike. I think inspiration it has to be fed by consuming things, content and books, words, and also by practice. It has to be fed by both. I think it's easier to find inspiration in work where you are going to share your personality and your voice. It's things like personal blogs or fiction or something where it's your opinion. If it's functional writing, you turn up to work and you've got to bang out 3 boring business blogs. It's about the process. It's about having a step-by-step process and sitting yourself down and going through it, because you're not going to feel excited about writing, about financial products probably. But yeah, I'd say if it's a form of writing that is one where you get to show your own personality, I mean, for me personally, I find that more inspiring and easier to get going on. I suppose writers can be different though. I mean, we've all got different approaches. Maybe some people find it difficult. What is my opinion? What is my voice? Where is my inspiration?
I think you're right, though. I think we've talked about it before about reading as a writer, and when I guess it depends on the genre of writing too. But I've had students. One of the exercises I've done with students is ask them what their favorite writers were and what their favorite pieces of writing were, and then ask them to identify what about it they like. Try to be very, very specific. And they might say something like, I like that they write in short paragraphs, or I like their long sentences, or I like the way they break grammar rules and use, sentence fragments for emphasis. Whatever it is that they notice in the writing that they enjoyed, I said, well, that's part of the voice. That's part of the characteristics of that writer's voice. It's that writer's choices that they've made. And that is partially the result eventually of editing, right? As you get your ideas down and you sculpt them, that shapes the voice, the delivery of the voice. But I think we need to read. I think we need to do all these things to find ideas. Ideas emerge from all kinds of things. Have you guys ever heard about the power of journaling? I don't remember where I picked this up, but years ago, someone recommended me to journal every day. So also in that sort of ass and chair thing, some days you don't have ideas about your essay that you're working on or your piece of fiction, but fresh out of bed, write a few pages of journal notes, just gibberish, right? Just pure brainstorm. Go fast, don't think, just put down everything that pops into your mind and empty, just purge. And that through that process gets ideas going. And later in the day, you may take one little piece of that and incorporate it into your writing. So that's another tip for generating inspiration, generating ideas, I think.
Yeah. Something like there, we're the two parts to it. There's the you're talking about the rewriting, right? The editing, it's where you're more conscious, right? You're kind of drawing on some techniques explicitly, right? Sculpting, you were saying. And the other part of it is more comes from your unconscious mind, right? So if you think about great writers, and think about people who study literature, right? Literary critics, and they analyze these great works of fiction, right? And they say things like, I think this is happening here. This is what this writer is doing, right? But sometimes when they interview the writer, he or she is like, not really, no. It just came from the unconscious mind. They weren't intentionally doing what the literary critic said that they were doing, right? So I think this is the point here, is that a lot of writing actually comes from the unconscious mind, especially at the beginning, right? So it's like what we're saying. So when you start, like you're saying, called journaling, right? Or just the first draft of something, doing it quickly, spontaneously, getting your ideas on paper, letting it flow, right? A lot of this should come from your unconscious mind. Phil?
Yeah, good point about the unconscious mind. I liked what Paul said about journaling and picking up on just one little nugget, or one word or one sentence or something from that as a good way to find inspiration and get started. Something you said, Pete, made me think that maybe voice is even hidden between the lines of what you write, and is what you don't say. If you think about someone like Hemingway, he's so sparse in what he writes. He's got a very particular, drab, almost pared down voice, and often a lot of the meaning is built in readers' minds through what is not there. So sometimes voice can even be what you choose to leave out, and how you get readers to build part of the meaning of whatever you're writing. It doesn't have to just be fiction either. I suppose maybe not so true in journalism. If you're leaving out key facts and things for readers to imagine, it might not be such good practice.
yeah, it depends on the type of journalism, but yeah, I see your point. Yeah, it's like a hard news article then. But yeah, it could also be more kind of literary journalism. Then this could be more relevant. Yeah.
Do you guys think there's room for? Actually, let me just ask you something about that example of Hemingway. That's a good example of how the voice in the writing, the personality of the writing, we can, in retrospect, we can see how it suits the personality of the man himself. Hemingway was a very hyper masculine character who boxed and adventured about the world and was probably this sort of man of few words in personality, or those words were very strong and direct and punchy, and his writing reflects that. And I think that goes back to that idea of confidence and inhibition, and encouraging our students to write freely, write from the subconscious, write from the unconscious, write from the heart, so to speak, write fast, get yourself on the page. Worry about the grammar and stuff later. Worry about, I've repeated myself too much. Maybe repetition is part of what you do. Maybe it's part of who you are. Encouraging them to be confident and to lower the inhibitions, especially in things like fictional work. The trick of anything artistic is to remove inhibition at first, get it out, right? Just purge everything out freely and then edit. But I think it's true for all writing. But I guess the question I'm asking is, like Hemingway, and assuming we can get our writers to be confident and to reduce their inhibitions about writing by writing in a safe space with our coaching, do you think voice is inevitable because it emerges partially, at least, from the unconscious, from their actual personality as an individual? Do you think part of voice is inevitable?
Only if you let it develop, right? So
yeah.
I think, sorry, go ahead, Pete. No, you go ahead.
So just say that going back to this thing about what I was saying at the beginning about if you feel like pressure, you feel stressed, your ass in chair, great. But if you're like staring at the screen, like, oh my god, like what am I doing? What am I going to write? It's just not. It just won't come. So you have to relax. I think that's the key point here I want to make is relax. There's a really nice quote. Charlie Parker, right, American saxophonist, right? So he said, "Don't play the saxophone, let it play you," right? So if you're trying too hard, to do this, to write this story, it just might not come. You have to relax, take a couple of deep breaths, right? And then just write in a relaxing way. Write something else, right?
Yeah.
If the idea that you got this idea, but it's not really flowing, there's something else. Yeah. Until that inspiration
going.
hits you.
Yeah. Or sometimes you just have to go for a walk, right? Take a shower, do something different. Instead of, I certainly don't recommend staring at the empty page.
No,
for me, that's just a waste of time. If you have the empty page in front of you, fill it with words. Doesn't matter what they are. Get the connections going.
Well, one thing you said, Bo, about voice being inevitable, I wanted to pick up on that because a lot of our listeners, a lot of writers are writing functional work which has to use the voice of a publication or a company or whoever is the author of the piece. A lot of work is not even going to have a byline on it. When it comes to writing content for a company, then you're not going to have a nice byline with your name and readers who care that it's you who wrote it. So I guess what we're talking about is how you can utilize the voice of the publisher who's responsible for the work, and that's what makes that piece effective. Or can you use your own voice to promote your work as more valuable and enjoy what you're putting out. So I think both voices are equally necessary or useful. I think some writers probably fear being different and want to be the same. And so I think voice is not inevitable in that if you play it safe, no one will be able to tell who wrote it. I mean, if you look at half of the posts online, whether it's on social media or on a sort of company page, it sounds the same because people are playing it too safe.
Makes me wonder what elements are being constrained in order for someone to fit into that sort of institutional voice, whether it's a certain paper or just the standard of voice that's established in a blog or a chat room or something. There's a sort of a norm that appears. I was tuning into a WhatsApp group with dozens of participants, and they're all language learners, but they're practicing their writing in English. And I was watching them, and I can't tell one from the other. And it's very interesting because at first, when they start writing, I can see sort of a pattern of, let's say, grammar use that's individuated. And then as they get going, it kind of normalizes, right? They sort of use the same back and forth with each other. It's really kind of fascinating to me. Maybe that also happens in the newsroom, right? Or the university, where a professor establishes a norm. You know, this is the professor's writing, and everyone sort of tries to fit within that rather than standing out, letting their own personality emerge. So it makes me wonder what aspect or what element that contributes to voice is being manipulated there.
This touches on how important it is to have a voice, because if you don't, you're simply making ends meet, being functional, putting out work which is acceptable, and people will read it and accept it and say, yes, that's the norm. But you'll never be someone whose work is considered highly valuable. And I think that's what we all want, isn't it? To construe more value in what we're putting out, you know, wherever you come from, whatever you're writing. So I'd recommend let's try and get these voices shining, right?
Do you guys feel like you can recognize your own voice, for example, in a LinkedIn post?
I mean, I'd have to compare them against others.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say, though, isn't it? Because you know what you've written. You'd say, yeah, that's me because the content.
Is just an observation. Sorry, Pete.
I was going to say, so I'm interested in this kind of, you know, how your own voice fits in within a particular newspaper, right, or newsroom, like you said, right, or going, you know, the example of the LinkedIn posts, right? So that's an easy example, right? So, you know, lots of people are writing on LinkedIn. There's a certain style, right? There's a certain style for posts on social media. There's a certain style that's different for different newspapers, right? So it could be one newspaper, it's a little bit slightly more formal, slightly more academic, maybe for like a reader that has slightly more educated reader, right? And then there's an example, tabloid newspapers, right? So, you know, then the style is totally different, right? So the challenge, I think, is to find your own voice within that newspaper or within LinkedIn, right?
I have noticed, I've observed, and I'd like to point to the example of Philip's LinkedIn posts. Both of you post on LinkedIn, but since I've known Philip longer and followed his posts for a longer time, I'd have to say, and also, you know, I see everyone else in my network's posts. I see a lot of posts, but I'm always struck by Philip's. They really are outstanding. And having gotten to know you a little bit, I do see your personality in there. I see the patterns of your sense of humor. Um, there's a literary quality to them. There's like I said, the sense of humor emerges. There's a unique way you structure your sentences, the way you also structure your post itself. It's different. So there's an element of comparison with voice, I think, within a format, within a genre. Like, we compare our literary heroes. We compare our favorite journalists or something. So I wonder if there's, does voice exist in a vacuum? If you read, like Hemingway, for example, only, like he's the only writer of fiction and literature you've ever read, would you sense that voice? But does part of it naturally exist in relation to other voices? But and to our listeners and viewers, I would definitely encourage you to check out Philip's LinkedIn posts. They're exceptional. And I mean that as a compliment, Phil, but also as an example of how it's possible for voice to emerge even in a post. There's voice in there.
Well, I'd tip the cap to Pete's as well, because you've got your posts tend to be a bit longer and more detailed than a lot of the stuff that you'd get on social media, which I think is also really valuable and is part of your voice as somebody who teaches journalists and helps them out. I mean, for me, developing that voice comes from reading particular content creators or writers that what they write resonates with you, and you get inspiration because you can see they have a particular voice. But it's kind of different because 50 years ago, before the internet and social media, it was much easier to have a distinct style. I think now, like you said with your WhatsApp group, things are becoming a bit more homogenized. So I would advise people to learn the rules and then break them, because if everyone's writing a post which is saying, let's all give our New Year's resolutions, it just becomes noise if you do another one. But if you go against the grain or put some kind of twist on New Year's resolutions, then people will, pick up on that. So yeah, I suppose this is a bit of a crossover, isn't it, between talking about the topics of what you're writing about and the structure of it, and also your particular voice. But I mean, just before Pete jumps in, because I have a little thing I wanted to say about humor, actually. I mean, for me, what we're talking about voice comes down to 2 points. One of them we've already talked about, which is culture and where a person's from and their unique perspective. And the other one is just simply about being human. We've got so much AI writing going on now that all of the writers out there should be really thinking, how can I add the most value and the most personality to my own stuff, to my own writing, is going to be massive going forward. I think humor is one of them. I've just written a piece on musicality and sound in writing, which again is something that people can use. But I'll give you a quick example of something I've got here, which comes from a book that I recently wrote, a children's book. And it goes as follows. In a competitive game, Uncle Barry is like a dog with a bone, except the dog is actually a badger on steroids, and the bone is a machine gun. So it's supposed to be funny. It's kind of funny, but my point about using humor there is you've got a well-known idiom like a dog with a bone. It's sort of a cliche, and we skip over it. And then you can play with that and say, let's change that cliche. Let's replace the images that you find. So writers can develop their voice by either using humor or by doing things like creating unique metaphors or imagery. Rather than cool as a cucumber, you could have like cool as a killer, or something which is just putting a twist on that. And I think that's one of the ways that I wanted to impart, get the ideas going and allow your voice to shine through.
That's a brilliant point, Phil, because I work with a lot of writers who are at a point where they've learned a lot of English idioms and expressions, and they're determined to use them in their writing. But what ends up happening is, because they've learned them in a school or a textbook, they're cliched. Yes, people out there in the English-speaking world will use them, so they should learn them and recognize them as consumers of English language. But when it comes down to writing, I always advise them, cut the cliche. Create your own idioms.
What are the top 5 cliches? Maybe we should do them so people can avoid.
And
when they're
using, any find on lists on the internet.
And they're so determined to use them because they think that makes them sound like a native English speaker. But what it does is it just erodes voice. So I'll encourage them to use figurative stylings, but make it unique to the subject matter, to the image system that's in their story or their topic. The badger, that's a great shift of metaphor. And when they can create a little world of images and words inside their piece of writing, it becomes unique to them. It becomes born out of the subject matter and their personality. I'll give you an example. One of my students is a chef, and he was writing a piece, and he was using some really tired cliche. And it was something like, I can't remember what it was, but something like the raining cats and dogs thing. And I said, but you're writing a post. It was like basically a little article about working in a restaurant. I said, why don't you use food image? Instead of raining cats and dogs, there's no cats and dogs in your kitchen or in the bar. What is in there? Use images from there, right? Like, I don't know, French fries falling into the deep fryer, or the bartender overpouring the shot glass and soaking the counter. Use images that belong in that world. Then it will become a more unique expression of a voice within that content. So this idea of, I just think cliche is a great way to quickly bury your voice, because it's just a normalized a voice. It's sort of you're just using someone else's voice, whoever came up with raining cats and dogs.
Just a really quick one on that. So if you want to use idioms, right, in your writing, because using idioms or other figurative speech, right, is a good way to engage readers, right? So you want to do that, but don't look for idioms on the internet, right? Because you will get a lot of cliches, right? Instead of doing that, and we talked about it before, notice them, right? Notice idioms, metaphors, right? Other figures of speech in other writers, well-established writers, right? Best writers from your favorite newspaper, right? And notice them, highlight them, right? And then you can write your own examples using them. And when you become advanced, right, then you can actually more what you're saying, Phil, right? You can actually start to really play with language, mix the metaphors, right? Take a cliche and like reinvent it, right? But to start with, the basics is just to notice idioms that are not yet cliches, right? So people are using them in their writing, but they haven't been overused, so they're not cliches yet.
Can I just jump in there before I forget it? Just yesterday, I was reading an essay written by Joan Didion, the American writer. And this is one of her early essays about her youth, not young adulthood, her early 20s, living in New York City. And she had grown up in California. And this is an essay, so it's a kind of a personal memoir essay. But what's fascinating about it is exactly this sort of thing. What she does in this essay is she's talking about the challenges of being early 20s living in a city like New York, which is described as very hard, right? Concrete everywhere. It's the concrete jungle. But she chooses, all her figurative language uses elements from California imagery that she's carrying around with her. So sunshine, fruit and oranges, the desert climate, the dry air. She never mentions concrete. It's all this sort of natural, nostalgic imagery from California, but she's using it to describe New York City. So it creates this beautiful contrast of where she is and what she's carrying around with her. And it creates this voice, this image of a displaced person, of a person who doesn't belong in this city, trying to make her life there, a Californian living in New York City. And it creates such an amazing contrast. She never has to tell you that she feels out of place. The language tells us that. The language is out of place. Now that's a kind of obviously it's an advanced and subtle technique, but it's a way of individualizing that piece that's unique to her and her personal experience. She came from California to New York City, and that's poured into the words. You just get a strong sense of her, like you said, Phil, her humanity, the individual she is as a writer and as a person. So I don't know, it comes back to what you said in the beginning, Pete, I think. This idea of what both of you said, this idea of encouraging our students to believe in themselves, to believe their voice is valuable, to believe their experience is valuable, and to develop in them the confidence to express it with as little inhibition as they can muster, so that whatever it is that they are comes out in some form. Does that make sense? Sorry, as
Absolutely.
usual, my points are long-winded and winding.
Maybe we're looking at this. Sorry, Pete, I was just going to say, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe we should be saying, what has no voice? I'll tell you what has no voice. AI writing. If you try out ChatGPT or any Jasper or any of these AI writers, what that's missing is humor, is opinion, is personal experience, is the unique choice of phrase, is any kind of story to it, and choices of things like sound techniques or particular patterns of sound. It's all very functional, and it seems like writing that can be consumed and understood. But I think what's missing in that is all of the things that, writers should be like if you read a chat response and you think, oh, that's missing this, or wouldn't it be better if it had that in it? That's your voice coming in, and that's what you should be adding into your own work.
That AI has no backstory. It didn't come from California to New York City. So there's no humanity, there's no human experience. They weren't an abused child. They weren't angry about something. They're just writing the idea. It's the ultimate in dry writing. Even a dry academic paper, there's voice to it. There's the perspective and the opinion of that writer writing about that topic. The AI is a great way to, maybe that's a great tool for learning voice, to showing an utter absence of voice.
So AI could have its, it could have, I mean, if it's used wisely, right, it could be useful in the editing stage, right? As long as you don't like edit out your voice, right? I think Phil mentioned this in a past episode, advising people to turn off, for example, Grammarly or other apps, right, when you're writing your first draft, because that is the worst way to inhibit your natural flow, right? If like you start writing and straight away you've got these red lines, right? So I mean, AI is never going to replace that human voice, right? That original human voice.
Yeah, I think there are elements of, sorry, Paul, just to jump in. I don't know if I can share this picture actually. Let me try and just find it. And do I have to add a? I didn't have this prepared, so maybe in the show notes we can add a graphic about the writing process. But there's a graphic which has 7 stages. We often think about writing as you write it and you edit it, but actually there's so many more stages to that before you pick up your pen or open your laptop. And to Pete's point about AI being useful, it certainly is for several of those stages. For the idea generation stage, for checking your work, but there's a lot of steps in the middle which I'm not sure it will ever be able to help on. So it's certainly here to stay and is going to be greatly useful, but I think there's a lot of parts of the process that it won't be able to help. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of forgot what I was gonna say, but that idea that the AI, I've played around with that. What's it called? Chat GPT. Yeah, this idea that because it's non-human, it doesn't have the experiences that make a person's sensibilities, that develops a sensibility, including cultural. There's no cultural backstory to that AI. It's a universally accessible AI. So we talk about our students and our clients. Their cultural perspective is a valuable piece of their voice, right? The things that upset them about their culture, the things that they're proud of, the things that they consider beautiful about their culture or negative, all of that needs to be in the writing. All of that can emerge in the writing in something as simple and mechanical as a grammar structure. The positioning of the subject, the choice of passive and active, all that stylistic stuff we've talked about a lot in the past. Those are choices that express various things. I just don't know if an AI can do that. Certainly not yet, because they don't have a lived experience behind those choices. Whereas our clients do, our students do. Yeah, I don't know. The AI thing is troubling because on the surface it looks really impressive. But what are we impressed with? We're impressed that a machine can do that. We're not necessarily impressed with the possibilities of that or the potential. But those stages, I think you're right. I think at the beginning and at the end, there's maybe some use for AI. But in the middle, there's something, I think that those middle stages are where the voice lives.
Can you think of one key takeaway that you'd like to emphasize for our listeners?
As we're talking about AI, then I'll boil it down to that. Add elements to your writing that others can't, right? Including computers like AI. So that into that goes humor, your experience, your opinion, your culture, and any cool metaphors or unique phrases that you can own and make up, then add them. And also going back to that point about having a voice is much more valuable than fitting in. So go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Phil about take advantage of the way that you are unique, right? In terms of where you live, right? In terms of your culture, your life experience. Make the most of that and allow that to come out from your unconscious mind, right? So, I mean, I'd like to repeat that quote. I really like this from Charlie Parker. Don't play the saxophone, let it play you, right? So really try to get in touch with the unconscious part of your mind so that you can naturally flow, like let the pen flow onto the paper. with all that valuable stuff that makes you unique, that gives you your unique voice.
I think I would add, I completely agree with both of those, all of those ideas. That idea of the Charlie Parker example is apt, because a musician like Charlie Parker first mastered the pragmatics of the language. They mastered the technique of playing the saxophone, and then played a lot, and then took influence when they were learning the instrument, but at a certain point turn away from the influences, so you're not imitating. You learn by imitating, but at some point you have to turn away from them and write in the sense of writing, like Charlie Parker, play what sounded good to him, what he wanted to listen to. So coming back to this idea of your writing is an expression of who you are in all ways, in all dimensions, and developing the courage to express yourself. There's a lot of buzz online about being vulnerable and being authentic, and that's part of it. Learning to value your unique view on the world as a human, and trying to express your ideas as honestly as possible. I think voice emerges from honesty, because even if you haven't lived a life of incredible success or adventure or whatever, you've lived a life that no one else has. So valuing yourself, and this is maybe why writing is such a powerful personal tool as well, but valuing your difference, whatever it is, even if it's a small difference. I'll give you an example. As a child, I was really interested in a few things that none of my friends were. For example, I'm really interested in puppetry. Loved the Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet, by the way. I loved puppetry. I loved not only puppetry, but stage magic. David Copperfield, these kind of illusionists. And I also loved sports. So they might seem like an unusual combination of interests, but that's something that may, combined with everything else, makes me who I am. So writing in a way where I can touch on those things, let those things come into the writing, let my culture come into my writing, my perspective as a Canadian, all of that is going to end up in the writing if I'm honest. So I would encourage our writers to practice being honest in their writing. And even in the academic genres of writing, being honest about your opinions on things, being honest about whatever the topic calls for, but being honest and true to what you really believe about it, then your personality will emerge, I think. So I think this honesty and the courage and the confidence stuff is kind of lying underneath all the technical considerations of voice. And maybe that's our greatest value as a coach, is developing in them, our writers and clients, that confidence to, value what you are, because what you are is unique. I don't know. I think that's my takeaway. Developing that honesty.
Great takeaway about being yourself and going for it and running with your own voice. Well, I guess that's it, guys, for this month.
Yeah.
We'll be back in another month with another topic. And until then, let your unique voices shine through and keep writing.